Hello, and welcome to Sunday morning. First thing, I am Joey Desena of various web shows, 16-Bit Gems, Way Games Work, the Echo Screen Live podcast, and this is...
Hi, I'm Norman Caruso, and I'm the creator of The Gaming Historian. It's a documentary series about the history of video games, also on YouTube.
And we have, I think this is our third year, kind of doing a co-panel as well on kind of a weird mix of the history of video games and maybe some of the technology of video games. And this year is an idea we've been kicking around for a little while, which is just very specific days that have changed video games. Let's move on. Any excuse to use that GIF.
Yeah.
Basically, I think we were talking one day years ago about it's funny how certain events, just constrained to one day, had such far-reaching effects on people in the industry trends and such. So we were trying to kick in back and forth ideas about for our panel this year, and this seemed like a good one. So.
Yeah, and we're not saying these are the four. These are just four that we came up with that we think are some of the more important ones.
And to be specific, because I had to explain this to several people yesterday, they're not consecutive days.
Yeah, it's not 4 days in a row.
Yeah.
That would be
that would be
good pinpoint something like that. But
so with no further ado, let's get started. So the first one we got, and we're going to play a little game. So feel free to raise your hand if you want to make a guess. But this is June 15th, 1967. So just a little over 50 years ago. It was a very important date in video games. Would anyone like to guess?
Was it the sort of tennis game on the radar screen?
that's a good guess, but no, that's not it.
Nope.
Ralph Baer.
What about Ralph?
What about Ralph Baer?
Kind of his first Pong interactive thing.
So that's pretty close.
That's
so
pretty close,
I don't think anyone's going to get it. So this is specifically the pump unit, quote unquote, which was designed by Ralph Baer's team at Sanders Associates, which is the company he worked for when he developed the Brown Box, which I think most people know became the Magnavox Odyssey, the very first home video game system. So the pump unit was technically TV game unit number 2. I believe the Brown Box was TV game unit number 7. It's no wonder they came up with better code names for them. But yeah, Ralph Baer actually...
Can we talk about, I don't know if you're going to get this, but why it's called the pump unit?
Yes. So, so this was a prototype that was kind of built to show, hey, is there anything to this this video game thing that had already been around in things like computer space, and other tennis for two.
Right,
so
the radar.
Yeah, it's not the very first video game, but the idea is is there anything to this maybe in a home setting? And so his team, Ralph Baer was the lead of a large team of R&D engineers and associates. They were tasked with coming up with a prototype for it. And there were some chase games, there was I think a shooting game, and most of it was activated with, you can see, I can't point with my mouse pointer, but there's a wooden handle you can see on the front of the box, which is
on the bottom right in that left picture.
Yes, and so basically that was the control for the game, and this was shown to the executives at Sanders Associates, and they gave the green light and said, yes, let's see what you can do, try to turn this into a commercially viable product.
Yeah.
And that led to, like I said before, TV game unit number 7, the famous Brown Box, the next year. And that was later eventually licensed to Magnavox, which became the Magnavox Odyssey 4 years later. Norman, why is this important?
Well, it's important because imagine if those executives said, I don't think so.
I mean, it's
shot it down.
It's kind of, it's hard to think about nowadays, but it was a very new thing to have home video games. Is this even viable? Will people even know what it's all about? There's stories about even when the Odyssey came out, people were confused about whether you needed a Magnavox TV to use it with, and Magnavox didn't do a lot to really get rid of those rumors necessarily, but it was brand new, Wild West when it came to this stuff, and this was the first step. If those executives, the Sanders Associates, said, nah, there's nothing really to this, then, we would have home video games eventually, but it would be potentially completely different form.
Right, and Ralph Baer was notorious for his documentation,
Mhm.
keeping everything, and a lot of his patents are based on the pump unit. And well, there you go.
Yeah, there was lots of patent infringement cases brought against Magnavox in later years, and there's actually, it's hard to see, but there's lots of labeling and tagging. This is actually at the Smithsonian. This the pump unit, the original one, and it was initially tagged for patent infringement cases, and it still holds those tags today. So interesting bit of history there.
Ralph Baer wrote a great book about basically his whole life, and he talks about the pump unit a little bit. He has like scans. It's crazy how much documents he kept.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is great. I mean, and you can see video. Unfortunately, he died a few years ago, but you can see videos or of interviews he would give into his 90s, like at his home, and he's just surrounded by all sorts of inventions that he came up with. And it's really fascinating. A fascinating man.
I think, the creation of the home video game console is an important event in video game history.
Yes. Specifically, this predecessor to it.
Yes.
All right, this is a weird one.
Oh yeah, so yeah, we have question marks because there isn't really we don't know the date, but we know it's somewhere June 1978. Anyone want to take a guess on what happened June of 1978? Yeah?
Nolan Bushnell founded Atari?
No.
It's it happened a little earlier than that. Anyone else want to take a guess? Yeah?
Release of the 2600?
That was,
That was a few
1 year,
years.
1 year
I think
earlier.
2 years.
No, 1 year.
1 year.
Or celebrating
77?
Yeah, we're
You're right.
celebrating the 40th
Yeah,
anniversary.
40th anniversary. Apologies.
Wah, wah. All right, so this is the release of
Space Invaders.
Do you want to talk a little bit first before we get into that about the whole date thing?
Yeah, let's talk about dates.
I can't find a good one.
Wow.
Go ahead.
In college, my favorite history professor tried to tell us that dates don't really matter, but it drives me crazy sometimes when we can't figure out when something happened. And this is a good example. This is one of the most influential video games of all time, and we don't really know what day it came out. We don't know what day Super Mario Brothers was released on the NES.
Or Mario 3.
Or Super Mario Brothers 3, we don't know. There's no... And Mario 3 is the best-selling game on the NES. And,
Yeah, it's only relatively recently that video game history has been undertaken, frankly. People in the 80s were throwing out all sorts of primary documents for development and things like that. And a lot of developers had to save things out of dumpsters for us to even have any information about it. So yeah, this is one of those instances where we know Space Invaders was released in Japan in June '78, but we really could not find a date at all. So
please forgive me, I have some notes here. So Space Invaders was developed by a man at Taito named Tomohiro Nishikado, and it took him about a year to develop it. And it's important because one, it was not only one of the very first creative video games in that a lot of games at the time were based on stuff you do in real life. So play tennis, drive a car, Breakout was basically single player tennis. So Space Invaders was different. It kind of got into the creative realm of gaming. Maybe video games are, becoming an art form with Space Invaders. And it was a huge success in Japan. Came to the United States, also a huge success. Yeah, hit the next one.
yes.
And because of that, it made video games sort of a global industry. Before it was, video games were in Japan, but they weren't as successful as North America. Atari opened an office in Japan, and it did not do very well. Closed up shop pretty quickly.
Before this, the biggest games in North America were Atari.
Right.
basically.
Yeah.
That was it.
So it also, when the Atari 2600 came out, Space Invaders was one of the first licensed arcade games for a home console. And the Atari 2600 was selling well, but when Space Invaders came out, it basically quadrupled their sales. So it made the Atari 2600 a huge success. It was also the inspiration for several industry legends. So Shigeru Miyamoto credits Space Invaders with getting him interested in video games. Hideo Kojima says Space Invaders got him into video games. John Romero, of id Software, and John Carmack of id Software said they first played Space Invaders and that got them into video games. I'm sure many developers and programmers over the years first played Space Invaders and said, oh, I want to make games like this. Space Invaders was one of the first games to really incorporate music into the game, where...
Loosely speaking.
Yeah. I mean, it was like a heartbeat sound, but it combined the music with sound effects, and as the aliens came down, the music sped up, and I don't know if that was a happy accident, but it worked.
It was processing limitations. Yeah.
So yeah, that's. I don't think I can. I don't think I can say enough about how important Space Invader was to the industry.
Yeah, and that you can make an easy list of just saying that the most important days in video games are when these particular games were released, because they were just very influential and very popular, like Super Mario Brothers or Tetris or Grand Theft Auto 3, whatever. But I think this is the only one where we're taking the easy way out and saying, yeah, this is just very influential, so it kind of has to be talked about.
Yeah, and what was I gonna say? Hang on, y'all.
I'm hanging.
Actually, I think that's all I had.
All right.
Never mind.
False alarm. Okay.
I was making sure. Yeah, that's all I had.
Okay, this is one people might be able to get. So this was a very big event on June 1st, 1991. Sorry?
The founding of the ESRB?
Oh, no, not the founding of the ESRB or anything related to Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat. Release of the Super NES. No. About that time, but no.
Nintendo World Championship?
Nope, not Nintendo World Championship. So this was... Norman, you can explain a little bit more about this one, but...
Heyo. Yeah. Okay.
So the day before on... You just love that picture, don't you?
Well, okay. Yeah, we found that picture and I was like, geez. Funny enough, you can play the Nintendo PlayStation in the Video Game History Museum over here. The console is sitting in there, and the guy who owns it will let you play. I think you have Street Fighter 2 on there. So Sony and Nintendo had a pretty good partnership in the 80s. Sony was helping Nintendo with sound chips specifically. The Super Nintendo sound chip is a Sony chip.
Which is awesome.
Yeah, it's really good. And so Sony was like, hey, we kind of want to get into this whole video game thing. It sounds pretty cool. How about we help develop an add-on for the Super Nintendo? We'll use this new CD-ROM technology. And Nintendo said, yeah, let's do it. So in 1988, they announced a joint venture to develop a CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo. And it was called the PlayStation, so 2 words. But as the system was getting closer to release and they were hashing out the licensing deals and the negotiations and whatnot, Sony basically wanted complete control over the games. And that's a problem for Nintendo because that's how they made a lot of their money, licensing, especially on the NES. If you wanted to make a game on the NES, you had to, first of all, become an official Nintendo licensee, and then you had to buy all of your games from Nintendo, and they had like a minimum order.
All the cartridges,
Yeah, 10,000 cartridges.
And you could only release 5 per year. This is like Nintendo at its most stringent. They had 90% of the market,
Right.
and
Yeah, they were super, super strict. Well, Hiroshi Yamauchi was not a fan of not getting his money. So he asked, he had some representatives say, hey, well, maybe we can work out a deal with some other technology company and make this CD-ROM add-on. So Nintendo talked to a European company called Philips. And Philips said, yeah, we can make this CD-ROM add-on for you, and we don't want control of the games or anything. You know, in exchange for making this, we want the rights to some of your Nintendo franchises. And Nintendo was like, all right. So hit the next one. So on May 31st, 1991, Sony has no idea about this whole Philips agreement. So they announced on May 31st they are making the PlayStation in partnership with Nintendo. And then the very next day, on June 1st, Nintendo announces they're partnering with Philips to make the CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo. And
incredibly embarrassing for
Yeah.
Sony executives,
yeah,
which they don't play.
yeah. So basically, the Sony Nintendo deal falls apart, and what results is what's in the video game museum, that prototype console, the Nintendo PlayStation, and sadly enough, the Nintendo Philips deal fell apart as well.
We only wound up getting 4, I think, Nintendo licensed games on the Philips CDI.
Right. So you know the agreement was was still intact on Philips end, because they were able to use those Nintendo franchises on the Philips CDI, their own console, and that's why we have Zelda, Wand of Gamelon,
Faces of Evil, Zelda's Adventure,
and Hotel Mario.
What's a Mario? Oh no!
Yeah.
Yes.
Nice of the princess to invite us over, hey Luigi. Yeah, that whole meme thing.
So why is this important, Norman?
Well, first of all, let's talk about greed. This was pure greed on Nintendo's part. This is why the whole, it all fell apart, and kind of hurt Nintendo in the end, because smash that mouse button. It created Nintendo's greatest competitor. Sony was like, well, you know, we've developed this already, let's just make it our own console. And so they created the Sony PlayStation. One word, PlayStation. Yeah, it was an obscure console in the 90s. But yeah, now today you have, PlayStation is easily the best-selling line of consoles right now. PS4 has, 60 million units?
Yeah, I mean this
PS2 is best-selling home console of all time.
This basically helped to usher in, by the time the PlayStation came out in the mid-90s, like a fall from grace for Nintendo that lasted about a decade, until the success of the Wii kind of pulled them out of it. But yeah, basically this made Sony top dog for a while, and now they're back to like the best-selling console as well. But things are a little bit more even. Nintendo's still around; they're not going third party or anything like that.
Yeah,
but
yeah. Nintendo's fine, but like
it's kicked them in the chops quite.
yeah,
quite
they had a pretty rough patch from 1996 to 2006.
Yeah.
When the Wii came out. And you have, Sony goes forward with the PlayStation and the CD-ROM technology, and Nintendo says, we're going to stick with cartridges for the 64, and a lot of third parties abandoned Nintendo because of it. Square abandoned Nintendo and started releasing Final Fantasy on the PlayStation, and that definitely boosted sales of the PlayStation.
Yeah, and that's another thing, is that once a real viable alternative showed up, it kind of with the Sega Genesis, but especially with the Sony PlayStation, those third parties that were being beaten down by Nintendo saw an avenue to stop working with Nintendo, because there was another game in town, and things would never, no one company ever had such a stranglehold over third parties since Nintendo in the late 80s, basically.
Mm-hmm. Hey, basically Nintendo created their greatest competitor. So that's June 1st is a very important day in video game history.
It chose the form of their destructor.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
So this one I don't think anyone's gonna get, but if anyone would like to guess, you're more than welcome to. Nothing. All right. This is
Wait, do we have a guest right here?
Half-Life 2?
Half-Life 2.
Half-Life 2. Great.
Yes. No, I'm just kidding.
He's done it. No, it's not Half-Life 2. Great game, but no, it's not Half-Life 2. What's that?
Is it Steam?
No, that would be a good one though. Well, so we're also making sure that we're not running out. Yeah, we got time. We're gonna have some Q&A after this, and also if you would like to suggest some ones for us to talk about as well, we'd be happy to do that. But the last one that we have prepared for you today is
Not super exciting, but it is it's very relevant for what's going on today in video games.
So on April 29th, 2003, the only one we have on here not in June, by the way.
Yeah.
Maplestory was released by Nexon in South Korea. So this is
Anyone remember Maplestory?
yeah. Well,
It is terrifying. Actually, when we were doing research, I was like, oh, Maplestory. I remember playing that, and yeah, it's still a thing.
Yeah, and we were talking with
Just like RuneScape.
yeah, exactly. So Nexon is a South Korean company that made the first, as far as we can tell, the first freemium paid or free-to-play video game called Quiz in 1999, I believe, which was mildly successful. But Maplestory was their first like real success. It's an MMO.
Right.
Well,
It's a
I actually haven't played it. I've just read about it.
I played it a little bit in high school. It's a side-scrolling MMO, and I remember it didn't run very well at the time, in like 2003. But
Because of the servers are all
they're all in Korea. But
Yeah.
it was super popular because it was a free MMO, and that was just like unheard of in the day, like
free to play.
free to play.
But
Yeah.
you could pay actual money.
And get costumes, and you could get weapons.
Yeah, more importantly, the weapons.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is something that we're seeing a lot nowadays. So when this came out, MMOs were subscription-based. I think at least the biggest one that still is subscription-based now is WoW. All the others are basically free-to-play.
Right.
I just reloaded Star Trek Online for the first time in years the other day, and it used to be subscription-based, now it's free-to-play, and there's all this stuff about, hey, purchase this ship, purchase this outfit, purchase this hairstyle. I'm like, oh my god.
I mean, think of all the MMOs that have fallen into the graveyard.
Yes, and so this is kind of penetrating the gaming industry completely at this point, to where now you have the big debate recently is over Star Wars Battlefront 2, and Middle-earth,
Shadow of War.
Shadow of War, thank you. Because they have these loot box systems where it's basically pay to win. If you pump enough money into the game, you can get these orcs or these other characters or whatever that are going to give you a huge advantage in the game. It's not like some of these other games where it's just cosmetic. Now it's really starting to affect the game, and it's the pay to win strategy.
Right.
And the reason why, and so these are full retail, let me go back a minute. So this is a business model that's become really dominant in Korea, China, Russia, and it's growing even more. So it's into Japan and now over here in
Right,
North
and
America.
you're starting to see the erosion of the single player experience
And
in video games.
EA is kind of leading that way over here because they
Shut down Visceral Games recently, which were creating a single player Star Wars game.
right, and this has caused a bit of an uproar in the gaming community because, in theory, this is going to be terrible.
Right.
You have these, full retail games that are still essentially loot box system games. They're pay to win games. That's not fun. But the problem is that it is a successful business strategy. That's why EA in particular is really bad at it. So we were talking about this beforehand. I do not play very many mobile games, except for one. And it's Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. And I can't not play it. It basically is this freemium game where whenever a new character comes out, you have to unless you want to wait months to get it, you have to pay literally hundreds of dollars for a character that might not even fit the meta. And it's ridiculous how much money people spend on this game. Thousands of dollars, literally. It works. It's a business strategy that brings in a lot of money, a lot more than these single-player games, like the traditional model.
That's why you see ads during the Super Bowl for these cell phone games, like, you know, Kate Upton's Game of War, and
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
You know.
First time I saw Arnold Schwarzenegger hawking a Game of War game or whatever during the Super Bowl, I was like, how in the heck did they pay for that? Well, because it makes a lot of money. So, unfortunately, this was a date, this was an event, the Maplestory kind of opened the floodgates of showing how successful this can be as a business strategy. We haven't yet fully seen how it's going to affect the industry in the end. Is there going to be a big backlash? Is it just going to keep going this way? Certain game companies like Konami have just kind of fallen off the traditional video game making bandwagon because they're like, we can make more money just making...
The Chico machine.
Exactly. So in a lot of ways, the video game industry is still kind of roiling in the middle of this change, and its final form is no longer unseen. But yeah, it's probably one of the biggest. I don't know if controversies is the right word, but it's one of the biggest things the gaming industry is dealing with right now. So definitely an important day, an important event. So.
If only I would have known when I downloaded Maplestory.
You're the problem.
I was part of the problem. I didn't pay any money, thank goodness, but
Yeah.
you know, I was in high school, I didn't really have any money.
Yeah.
That's why I downloaded it. It was free MMO. I was like, heck yeah.
For the record, I don't spend money on Galaxy Heroes. I just waste way too much time. So.
Time is money.
Shut up. So, now we have a Q&A session, and this is very, we got like a little over 15 minutes, so. Also, we're kind of curious because we were talking about, there's probably lots of different days, like talking about Steam launching, that's changed the face of downloadable digital gaming, you know. There's some huge ones out there. So, any questions, any suggestions from you we could talk about?
I have no idea how easy it would be to pin a date down on this, but when Nintendo decided to get into electronic games from its playing card business,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
that Hiroshi went, maybe let's do this. Let's put batteries in this.
Yeah, so basically, what would be the single most important event in the transition of Nintendo from a Hanafuda?
The hiring of Gunpei Yokoi, probably.
Yeah, that's true.
He kind of. Well, the Gunpei Yokoi kind of led the charge of getting Nintendo out of all these weird industries. I mean, Nintendo did the playing cards, but they did love hotels, and they even did like instant rice at one point. But Gunpei Yokoi was a really talented engineer, and he liked to make kind of toys on the side. And they saw he made the
Game & Watch.
Love tester.
not the love tester. It's the arm.
Oh, yeah.
Grab hand, whatever it is, ball ring.
Yeah, it's like a
The extending
arm.
Yeah.
Press it and it shoots out and grabs it. And they, Hiroshi Yamauchi saw that and was like, let's try and sell this. And it was very successful, and they kind of got into toys from there. And from there, you see the rise of video games, and Gunpei Yokoi suggests, let's maybe enter this market, and then you get the TV Game 6 console, which was basically a Pong clone.
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't super successful, but it was enough. And
Right, it was
Game & Watch.
Game
was
&
the
Watch
first
was,
big one.
and that's a Gunpei Yokoi brainchild.
Yeah, and that helped to, I think, launch Nintendo of America as well, and bring games over here with there was going to be originally Radar Scope.
Right, and
games,
they
things like
started
that.
into the arcade industry, and yeah.
So yeah, I would say either the hiring Gunpei Yokoi or of course Shigeru Miyamoto, because you could definitely argue whether or not Nintendo would be as big as it is without Miyamoto. Just hit after hit.
But
in the
Miyamoto
early
wouldn't have
days.
applied at Nintendo if it weren't for Space Invaders. So we will go back. This is like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. We can trace it back to Space Invaders.
Everything goes to Space Invaders. So yes, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've actually got two, but I'm trying to decide between them. But let's start with the launch of Xbox Live. That was huge. That was a huge shift in
So,
home consoles being.
Bringing home consoles online. Now, home consoles have been online before, but not like Xbox Live.
Xbox Live was the first real centralized, very popular way to get online with your
Right.
games. I mean, there was like
Yeah.
Sega Channel. And,
Sega Channel, guys. I'm gaming online. I mean, no, it's not like that.
and Dreamcast too. Dreamcast definitely dipped its toes in the water quite well with that, but it just wasn't popular enough to take off.
Right.
But Xbox Live, with its subscription gaming service that you knew would be stable, yeah, that was huge.
And what was the other one you had?
Well, it's an interesting debate over the launch of EverQuest or the launch of WoW. Because EverQuest, you could make a justification that it made MMOs mainstream. I mean, there had been some before, but then, WoW launched into the stratosphere, so,
Either Ultima Online or EverQuest, I would say.
Yeah.
But Ultima was never quite
They
as
didn't
popular.
have the breakout success that.
So WoW was definitely, World of Warcraft's definitely like the biggest success story in terms of online MMORPGs. But
Oh, it's insane.
but I would say that EverQuest being as successful as it was,
Paved the way
Yeah.
for World of Warcraft, yeah.
yeah, and Blizzard's really good at that. They're good at taking certain ideas and really refining them into just gigantically successful ventures.
Real-time strategy.
Yeah, so EverQuest. Did you ever play EverQuest?
No, I had some buddies that did. I bought WoW on launch day, though, and played that.
You know what? The last time I played WoW was the beta, and I wasn't impressed. Womp womp. But yes, so we have two very important online events, which is Xbox Live for home.
Dark Age of Camelot, guys.
What?
Dark Age of Camelot.
And I would probably say EverQuest is a more important singular
It definitely is. Yeah.
event, but
In the back here.
So, clarification question. What do you think would have changed Nintendo's franchises if they had gone ahead with the deal with Sony, rather than diverting over to Philips?
It's tough. I don't know if, I do wonder if Sony would have eventually got into the industry.
potentially it would have made the latter part of the '90s a lot more palatable for Nintendo. I'll put it that way, because
Yeah,
Sega was really faltering by the time the Saturn came out.
Right. I think Nintendo would have stayed dominant throughout the 90s.
Yeah. Past that, then so many things have changed by that point, it's hard to really tell, and you'll inevitably get Microsoft into this space, I think.
And you do wonder if Sony would have even entered, because with that deal they have with Nintendo, they were making quite a bit of money on that.
They could,
And it's like, why would we create a whole new division of our company when we can just like piggyback on Nintendo and make all this money? So, yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, third parties would hate it.
Yeah.
Would there be another a successful entry into the space other than Microsoft, do you think? And assuming Sega eventually goes away, like it did. Or do you think Sega would have stuck around as that third?
It's possible Sega, I mean, you think about, like, if there's no PlayStation, maybe there's no PlayStation 2, and then the Dreamcast comes out, and,
That's true.
there's more money to go
PlayStation 2
around.
really did kill
Maybe Sega
Dreamcast mojo.
yeah. Maybe Sega stays around a little longer.
Yeah, and that's of course assuming that if the PlayStation was going to be an add-on to the Super Nintendo, and add-ons inevitably don't do that great.
Mm-hmm.
So the real question would have been, would Nintendo have taken the lessons learned from the the Nintendo PlayStation if it was released, and said, you know what, our next system is going to be CD based. I don't know.
And then you wonder, would the 64 even be developed? Would it even exist?
And Nintendo would have still had a lot of hubris, so
Yeah.
it's hard to tell. It probably would have been bad in the end for gamers, I would say.
Let's make it it should be a Black Mirror episode. It'd be really good.
All right, we've got, I think, 10 more minutes. Any other?
Yeah, so the game Gunfight came out in 1975. It was the first microprocessor arcade game. It was designed by Dave Nutting Associates, one of the two brothers who did Nutting Associates who did Computer Space. And that motherboard was designed to be flexible for multiple arcade games. Multiple arcade games were built on it, including Space War. or I'm sorry, including Space Invaders.
Mhm.
So Space Invaders was, that design was licensed to Taito, and then they did Space Invaders. So if you're gonna hang your hat on Space Invaders, you might have to go all the way back to Nutting Associates.
That's true, and Gunfight was, have you played Gunfight? It's actually a fun game.
Yeah, and that, when Nishikado designed Space Invaders, he did license, it was, I think they were Intel chips.
Until 80.
Yeah, yeah, he licensed that for, because like the computer, there were no computers out that could like run a game like that, so it was all like a hardware based.
You can see interviews where he claims he designed it. It's the same motherboard that's in Gunfight
Yeah, it is.
from
Yeah.
3 years earlier.
It's
Yeah.
the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon again. Like,
Yeah, and that's the thing, I mean, you could definitely trace things back to like the mitochondrial eve of video games, basically.
Yeah, but like,
that's deep dive.
but like, it's the same thing as like the Nintendo Entertainment System used the, Rico 6502, which is
Yeah.
the Atari 2600, basically used that as well.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, all that to say, you absolutely could have replaced the Space Invaders side with, say, Gunfight, and say this is important because it influenced Space Invaders with the same hardware, etc.
Right.
It's all subjective in the end.
yeah.
We were talking before, I was talking with Norm beforehand, I was like, should I put the launch of Maplestory as this slide, or should I go back a few years earlier and say Quiz, which was like technically the first freemium game that was released, but it wasn't as big and it wasn't as important, etc. So I just went with Maplestory. Again, it's all subjective.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, that's a very good one as well. So, thank you. You picked. That was way too many hands going up at once.
Green shirt.
I would say either the release of the first iPhone or the release of the App Store on the second gen iPhone would
For mobile
basically
gaming.
create the mobile game space.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say probably, I mean, again, you could go back and say the release of the iPhone was important, or the Palm Pilot before that.
Or the N-Gage. Not
Yeah.
not the N-Gage.
Yeah, I would, my personal preference would probably be, say, the launching of the App Store was very important for the proliferation of mobile gaming. That made it easy, an easy centralized place to download not just games, but any sort of application for your phone. To the point now where, like, on Windows they call them apps now, which drives me nuts, but
Yeah.
no, it's a program.
Well, now you have, even Nintendo's entering the mobile market now because they see how
Yeah.
huge it is.
And they've been doing well with Super Mario Run.
And
Even
the
though
Fire
it's-
Emblem
Yeah,
game.
and that won't be the end.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What was that Mii game they put out? Me Tell Me, yeah, I think that's like dead, but
Well, first try.
yeah. It was a first try, yeah.
You pick again. That's too much pressure.
Second row.
The launch of the Wii, I know you guys touched on that a little bit, but just the impact of motion controls and how that sort of changed the space a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the launch of the Wii, the impact of motion controls are, man, I don't know. I don't know if I feel that is a huge impact, just the motion control aspect. It was like big for a few years, and it's obviously still
Right.
around with the Switch, but I think it's less.
Well, and even the PS4 has their controller has built-in like.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing, but I don't think it's,
It dovetails into VR now.
Yeah, it kind of said that this
That's
works,
true.
this works, people are interested in this, which sort of paved the way for VR to just become the sort of blowout that it is right now.
yeah, I would still say that you could argue whether or not VR is going to be as big as people say it will be.
Right, that remains to be seen.
Right,
Yeah.
but.
But it is, you could say like the Wii kind of brought video games into households that like places that wouldn't necessarily have a video game. I mean, you saw the Wii in like, nursing homes where people could play bowling. People were buying the Wii that wouldn't necessarily buy a video game console, and I think with VR, they're like, oh, there's practical applications for this as well outside of just video games.
And I think Nintendo does their best work when they have that wide appeal to people that wouldn't normally consider themselves gamers.
Right.
It's like the Game Boy. you know, with
Tetris.
Tetris. You had
That was
businessmen
enormous.
and mothers walking around with Tetris to play. And of course the Wii as well. I almost think that the launch of the Wii is more important because it kept Nintendo around. If the Wii was a big flop, that might have been it. That would have been over 10 years of
It'd have been rough, for sure.
quote unquote failure for Nintendo, and they might not have been able to get out of that.
Yeah, the GameCube was pretty bad times for Nintendo.
Oh yeah, and the 60. I mean, the thing that really kept them going for that 10-year drought, quote unquote.
Was their handhelds.
Yeah, and Pokemon. If Pokemon, you could, man, the release of, or development of Pokemon is huge for a lot of reasons, but if nothing else, keeping Nintendo around. So, and a world without Nintendo would just be sad. You know, whether or not you like them or not, you have to admit that having that competition in the video game space is important. So.
But it's
Space
Nintendo,
Invaders.
but then Space Invaders. And then Gunfight.
You're gonna have to add
And
that
then
now.
Ralph Baer.
Yes.
But the invention of the radar.
And then the radar.
War, first of all.
And then human life.
I thought you were. Yes, sorry.
Oh, yeah, no, to dovetail into this topic, I would say, and it would still yet to be seen the true impact of it, but the ESRB saying that loot boxes are officially not gambling.
Yeah.
In China, they absolutely have, and forced Overwatch, in particular Blizzard, to divulge the ratios of being able to get certain things and then also add a currency to be able to buy them.
Yeah, absolutely, and you actually hit on something I wanted to talk about that I forgot, which is like the point, since this has been such a big business model in Asia for so long, those certain countries there, especially China, have kind of hopped on by now saying, hey, this is kind of gambly. You need to tell people what their percentage of getting certain items are in these loot boxes, whereas in America, we're just like, what? Huh? Okay. Well, just go, do whatever. I don't think that's sustainable. At some point, it's probably going to get the government and when you get government regulations into the industry, that's what the ESRB was there for.
I can definitely see this going that way because you have, I mean, it's happening with like fantasy sports right now, where the government's getting involved. Like, hey, this is like gambling. And I can definitely see loot boxes going that way. The ESRB is an independent organization.
Right. But created by the industry to self-govern so that the government doesn't govern.
But then you have like, I think recently there was some like YouTubers that were like promoting this this website for like CS:GO weapons and skins or something, and they didn't say that they owned the website, so they could they could tip the odds in their favor when they play these games and film it like, oh look, I won this really rare skin, and then they get all these people to go to the website and put money into it and they win a bunch of crap.
I will say that if the industry does not self-regulate with these loot boxes and the pay-to-win gaming and such like that, I think the government's going to step in. So unless they have an ESRB moment there, it's going to get messy. So.
Joe Lieberman is coming back, baby.
Joe Man.
Come save us, Joe Lieberman.
I think we have time for one more question or event, and Norm, you pick.
Yes, on that end.
Me?
Yes.
Okay, so a couple things. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, so going back to the Space Invaders, I was told yesterday that the Intellivision's Missile Command is the first game to have sound.
Well, there's sound all the way back to the computer.
Yeah.
Digitized voice or anything?
It might be
a televoice module.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might have been the digitized voice. I can see that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we were talking about that beforehand. It's like, well, is this? And first off, does a heartbeat count as music? But secondly, this is the first, well, at least one of the first games that has not just an intro tune jingle and an outro jingle. It's like something going on during gameplay.
Yeah, it's almost like a soundtrack, and it like impacts how you feel when you play, because like I said, the music gets faster as they get closer, and it's like...
So again, it's a loose definition of music, but yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, we were talking about mobile gaming, Pokemon Go. I can see that with being very influential as well, and it also had a resurgence in the whole Pokemon fan base. fan.
It's like augmented reality.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's another system where, and certain games are better deals, quote unquote. You get more for your money than, like, for example, Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, you get terrible return on your money.
Stop promoting that game.
Do not play it.
Do not play that game.
Pokemon Go is relatively okay though. From what I played it a little bit when it started, and I haven't really since. But I have friends that still play it. I know it's very popular still, and it makes like $1 million a day still. How does it do that? Because they sell Pokeballs or lures or whatever for a few bucks, and people feel like they're getting their money's worth. So.
And then even before that too, like the remakes of the remakes is Soul Silver and Heart Gold also have the Pokewalker as well, where you can actually transfer one of your Pokemon onto your Pokewalker and you can raise it in your house.
Yeah.
Take that back to Pocket Pikachu.
Tamagotchi, which goes back to Tamagotchi, which goes back to Space Invaders. So, thank you all for coming. I think our time is up. You can find my stuff on clanofthegreatwolf.com. And first time ever announcing there is a new podcast coming out soon called Analysis Paralysis, where my buddy and friend, the Commodore, and I will talk a topic to death for an hour. We're recording episodes now to release in the near future. We just did one on peanut butter. Norm, where can people find you?
You can find me youtube.com/gaminghistorian. Got all my little documentaries up there. I'm also on Twitter pretty frequently. And I'm on, been streaming on Twitch lately a few nights a week, just playing some classic games. And I recently added a chat bot that just like spurts out random facts about the game, like every 10 minutes. So it's fun. So you learn something and you get to experience. Like I played Super Metroid for the first time ever a few months ago. Yeah, no, I've never played it before, so I did a blind playthrough, and man, that game is incredible. Still today. What
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Crazy.
It was so good. No one told me.
So, thank you everyone for coming, and please enjoy the rest of your day.
What a time.